Today I'm going to show you how you can create a portrait screenshot in The Sims 4 from start to finish using only shaders from Marty's mods. It assumes you already have a basic understanding of how to install shaders, how to enable them, and how to edit shader settings. Let's get started. I've already set up my sim where I want her, and I'm just going to try and bring the camera closer. Bringing up the reshade window, the first thing I'm going to do is select Sceneweaver, Letterbox and Canvas. And here you can see I've already set it to a custom aspect ratio of 4:5. This provides a nice square or rectangle shape that we can use for better composition for a portrait shot. Let's set up how we want her to be. A nice close shot. Sceneweaver also gives us the overlay grid. I've chosen here rule of thirds. You've got lots of options, and that helps me decide where I want to set everything up. Having her eyes roughly at that top line will give us a pretty good composition. There we go, let's have it like that. And you can leave it like this, or what I'm going to do is turn off the canvas, just leaving the letterbox. And I've still got these black lines either side, which are going to keep that frame so I know I'm only working on this section. I've already got anti-aliasing enabled, and this is because when you want to use depth effects in ReShade, you have to turn off the edge smoothing option in The Sims 4. So to counteract any of the jaggies that you might get, I've turned on anti-aliasing. The first thing I'm going to do is turn on the Immerse Ultimate Loot Manager. Now here in add-ons there is the Marty's Mods Loot Manager, and if I do that, you've got lots and lots that you can install yourself by downloading them in various places in the internet. I've got loads, as you can see, most of them from one of the mloot repositories that you can find on GitHub. I made my own loots with settings that I put together from ReGrade previously, but wanted to have on all the time. So a really handy way is to put all of those settings into one loot, and then you can enable it and keep it all the time, and you can move between them. You can see there's not a lot of difference, but those are the ones I like. So there we go, loot off, loot on. So that gives me the basic foundation to the colours that I want. Next, I'm going to go into ReGrade. And here I'm only going to use calibration. And then I go down here and I've got a few different options. What I'm interested in is Lab A offset and Lab B offset. And this is going to give me some initial changes to colours. With A, you'll see it going more magenta, more green. And you can right click at any time to reset to default. And here, more orange, more blue. For this, I'm going to go a little bit blue and a little bit green. And I can press bypass calibration here just to see the difference, and it's very subtle, but it just takes away a little bit of the warmer colour that was there to begin with, just to give me a more neutral base to start with. So that is ReGrade. Next, I'm going to go into ReGrade Plus, and I turn it on, nothing happens because I haven't done any settings yet. Up here, I've got the add-on tab for ReGrade Plus. And I'm not going to go into more technical stuff about using the histogram or any of the waveform options here. All I'm bothered about at this point is making something that I think looks good. So I'm going to start. I do look at this, by the way, the histogram at the bottom, which just gives me a very basic idea of where I want the lights and darks to be. Because we've got Sceneweaver black bars either side, we have got this little spike here in the shadows, but I know that that's being caused by this black either side, so I'm not too worried about that. So in lights here under the high dynamic range, you can see we get some changes that. I'm just going to bump it up a little bit. And I'm going to bring down the shadows a little bit. And you can flip it on and off there, just to see whether you like it. I quite like that. That's all I'm going to do at the moment there, because I'm going to start most of my work here with Relight. Relight is a big favourite. It will change everything about the image for you and make really dramatic portraits. First thing you need to do is enable Launchpad. This is like a helper shader that makes a lot of the other shaders work best. And then I can click on Relight. I've got Enable Subsurface Scattering turned on. If I turn it on and off, you can just see it gives a little more dynamic edge to skin. And then I'm going to turn on the first light. There we go. So if I go down to the bottom, I've got this enabled, so I should be able to see the circle that shows where the light is. It's just behind one of the black bars at the moment, so I couldn't see it, but there we go. And I can move that forwards, backwards, and it's a bit too bright, so I'm going to turn that down. And I think for this side of her face, I want a slightly cooler colour. So I am going to start moving the temperature and tint options until I get a colour that I want. I think a nice bluish colour is good there. And I can just decide where I want it. And I'm going to turn on another one. And you can see that that's on the left side of her face. And I want that to be a warm colour, so we're going to go in the opposite direction. That's a slightly orange colour. Add a little bit of pink warmth into it. There we go. You can see we can adjust the intensity, the brightness of it as well. Now this doesn't look that great at the moment because it's quite a bright scene. But what we can do is we can adjust that ourselves. At the top of the Relight menu, there is Ambient Intensity. I'm going to turn that down and look. What it does is it takes away the lights from the rest of the scene so that the only light that's left is that coming from Relight. It can go all the way down, but I don't want it to be that dark. So I'm going to pick something sort of like that. This still doesn't look that great at the moment, but now I've decided on what ambient intensity I want, I can go back and revisit the lights. Let's turn off that one for the moment and just focus on this one. It's a little bright. Let's just turn that down a little bit. And let's move it where we want it. I'm going to move it away from her. You won't see it now because it's disappearing behind the black bar. The closer it is to her, the brighter it will be. So you want to move it slightly away. And you can see how it changes where the shadows fall when I go up and down. One thing I've noticed is just here, you can see there's a little bit of light poking through here. And I don't want that, I want all of that to be in shadow. So what I can do here is change the object thickness. Keep watching this area here. If I increase that, you'll see the shadow expand. You can start to see it here as well, the higher I go. So I think that is about good. We've got shadows where they would naturally fall around there now. So let's go back to here, decide where we want this. How bright we want it, not too bright. And whether we want it high up, low down. I think I want it about there and a little bit further away. There we go. And then let's go back to our first light, the blue one. Oh, that's really bright. Let's turn that down now. And adjust where we want that. Let's have that a little bit lower down. Further away. And then we can decide, I think a bit further back. The penumbra can be made bigger, and when it goes bigger, your circle gets bigger, or it can be made smaller. What this does is alter the softness around the edges of the light. You can see, watch her cheek here, how more of the light falls softly on her face rather than there being harsher edges to the shadows and where the light hits lower down. So you can adjust that. I think that is quite nice. And let's see if it makes any difference with this one. That makes it quite softer. So let's have that, and then we can readjust where we want that. Further away, I think, and further forward. And it's a little too orange for me, but I can change that with other shaders as well. Okay, I'm quite happy with that. So I'm just going to change this to disabled and my light bulbs go away. So off, on. Going down to RTGI, turning that on, this gives ambient occlusion and bounce lighting. Again, it's got an object thickness setting, which at this point isn't doing too much, so I'm going to leave it like that. And I can change the ambient occlusion setting to quite high, and you can see everything at the back gets quite a bit darker. I don't want it quite that high, we'll put it like that. And the bounce lighting, if I put that high, you can see we start getting some bounce light. With Sims 4 being quite a low poly game, you get problems like this around under her chin there, so you need to be mindful of that and modify it if you need to. I'm going to drop it back down to about 5, and let's see. I think that just gives a little bit more depth and interest to the image. Now, you don't strictly need to use MXAO if you're using RTGI, but I choose to with The Sims because I think it adds extra depth to these quite simplistic models. Let's turn it on. And for portraits, it's especially nice because it helps define the face away from the rest of the body. Here, I've just got a sample radius of 1.5. You can change that. Let's change that all the way up to 8 and see what happens. Not a great deal. It doesn't really matter too much for things like this. And then I've got ambient occlusion amount. I've got it quite high. And then off, on, quite like that. It's given her some separation around here, a little bit more shading behind here. If you're playing a more realistic game, you probably don't want strong settings like this, but for a stylized game like The Sims, it can be quite nice. So now we've got the lighting set up as we want it, we can think about the colours. Going back into ReGrade Plus and going down to split toning, I can decide if I want some changes to the shadows, midtones and highlights. And if I go up, you can see everything changes, and you can move this around until you think, oh, that looks good. And I think somewhere around here looks good. But I'm going to then bring down the saturation so it's not quite as strong. Actually, that looks quite good to me. So let's leave it like that. And then let's do the same with the shadows. We can see all the way around the circle until we spot something that we think looks good. I think something like that looks good, and let's change the saturation. I think that looks okay. And then let's try the highlights. Oh, they're really strong. We've got a lot of highlights in this image. So let's see where we are. I quite like that. Let's see about the saturation limit. Again, quite high. Now I can toggle this on and off to see how it goes, like that, and you can see a huge difference. That was the original one, that's the new one. I really like that, let's keep it like that. Now I might think that the oranges in the image is a bit too saturated. I can come down here to Hue versus Luma, and I can click on that to go to the saturation wheel, and I can click on the orange option here. If I bring it in, we completely get rid of any saturation there. I push it out, even more saturated than before. Can even move it to other points in there to change the colour completely. But I think at this point I just want to bring down the saturation just a tiny little bit, and you can see It's not affected it too much, just a tiny little bit, just to take the sting out of that orange hair. And we can try reds as well, because the reds, especially around her lip there, I think are quite strong. Just a tiny little bit down. There we go, not much. And if I wanted to put a lot more focus on her eyes, which are nice and green, and make them pop, I can come over to the green section. It's probably going to be handled by a little bit of yellow as well, and maybe even a little bit of the cyan. Let's see. We'll grab the green one, and I can bring it out a bit more. Let's try the yellow. Yeah, you can see the left one is handled quite a lot by the yellow one, so I can bring that out a little bit. And the cyan one actually isn't affecting too much, so let's leave that as it is. And there we go, we can see the slight changes that we've made there. And if I wanted to make any more changes, quite large sweeping changes without much detail, I can go up to temperature and tint at the top. And you can see this controls the temperature, making it cooler or warmer. You can go really crazy with this, but you can just adjust it again however you like. Right click to reset and tint again. But I think I'm already happy with what we've got here. For the moment, I'm not going to do anything else to contrast or to the shadows or highlights, maybe a little bit more to the highlights. That's okay. So now you can see ReGrade off, ReGrade on. That gives us quite a pop of colour. And then how Relight affects it. Look at that, that's awful. So this is why I did relight first. I wanted to set up where I wanted my lights, and then I could do the colour grading afterwards to adjust for anything that wasn't quite right. Next, I'm going to add Solaris. Solaris is bloom, and I've put into Solaris artistic mode here, which means I can choose from different options. And I quite like a dramatic look, so I've chosen autumn. And if I increase the bloom intensity, you can see really crazy things happen. We don't want it all that way. And then this one sometimes makes the scene go a little darker, so I can log exposure bias, bring it back up again, so it's brighter again. And you can just adjust those together to get something that you like. And you can move this up and down below other things depending on what you want. I quite like it here, sandwiched between ReGrade and ReGrade Plus. I like how it interacts with the two different shaders there. Now I'm going to add some film grain. I like grain in my pictures, not everybody does, but because the Sims can get quite a lot of what's called colour banding, because there are a lot of flat colours, film grain will often help mask that a little bit. Here I've not got the intensity very high. You can really bring it up and you can see a lot of the grain there, or you can bring it down a bit lower. I'm going to have it around there. And what I've also done is increase the analog film gamma. This is responsible for brightening. I'm just going to have it slightly. And then we have analog film shadow. And this gives you a boost to shadow contrast. And I'm just going to have that about there. Now one thing I'm going to do now is there's a new shader called PTVL, and this is fog. Now you can't use this in gameplay, it's quite a unique shader. You have to render it by pressing the F key. So let me press the F key and look at that. Now that's really bloomy because it's interacting with Solaris, but I can change the intensity all while keeping F pressed down. But what you're going to have to do is keep juggling these different effects, because I set Solaris up before I did PTVL, and now I think Solaris is too strong. If I turn it off, you can see that takes that away again. Don't be afraid to not use shaders that you usually like if you don't think they work for this particular shot. Actually, I prefer it without Solaris, so I'm going to turn that off again. And so PTVL off, on. And I quite like how it makes that background slightly more indistinct, a little softer, so it's bringing more focus to the character. And if I want to adjust the sharpness and clarity of the character, My first port of call is local Laplacian in the Meteor pack. And turn that on. If we turn it all the way down to the bottom, you can see, there we go. The stronger we go, the more definition she gets. And that can just counteract any softness we might have in the image. So off, on. And then I can also use something like sharpen if I want to add even more sharpening, but I don't want it to be too sharp. Let's turn that down a little bit. Too sharp can not look always that good. So just a tiny little bit. And then as my last thing, I'm going to add depth of field. Now, I've already got it set up how I like it. I've got quality set really high, but you can adjust that however you want. My FPS has plummeted, but this is just for a still photo, so it doesn't matter. Now, I like to use the anamorph bokeh ratio. You can see if it's set to 1, the bokeh discs, or bokeh discs, I don't know how you're supposed to say it, are perfect circles. If I increase the anamorph ratio, they get narrower or elongated really. So I like to make them slightly elongated. I'm also using the advanced bokeh effect set to 1, which gives me these tangential and sagittal, I think I'm saying those correctly, bokeh scales, which will do different things. Now look what happens when I move this one. Keep your eye on these discs at the back. They start moving in different ways. And then this one starts moving in that direction. Now I quite like that because it makes it look like they're moving around her a little bit. So I'm going to keep that like that. I'm using manual focal plane depth, which allows me to move it backwards and forwards manually. And push it back again. There we go. That's about where I want it. And then for focal length, I have a very large focal length there, which makes everything, it's like using a zoom lens, it makes everything in the background more blurry, effectively. And a low aperture, which, same thing, makes it kind of more blurry in the background. For portraits, that's what I want. And then foreground, background blur. I've turned off the foreground blur. I don't want to be worrying about that. I've only got it set to 1 for the background blur. I only want blur to be behind her. So there we go. I've got that set up how I want. Off, on. And then one last thing I like to do before I take the picture is long exposure. It's not as important in The Sims, but in some games you will find some of the depth effects like relight or RTGI can cause flickering, especially around hair and things like that. A good way to help smooth some of that out is to use long exposure, which freezes everything over a number of frames, blending them together so that some of that flickering isn't there anymore. I'm going to set this to capture while holding button, which means that for the length of time that I press the capture button here, it will hold and freeze those frames. So let's do that now, and you can see it's capturing. I can let go and it's going to freeze there. I'm going to turn off display progress animation so that doesn't interfere with anything. And I think I'm ready to take my screenshot. There we go. And then I can let go finally. I can press reset for long exposure. I can let go of my PTVL button and you can see that stops working. And I can just turn everything off. And we're back to normal. And then we can take a look at the finished screenshot.